And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. You know, sometimes there are signs early on that something is not just, it's just like it's fated to not go well. In the second term of the George W. Bush administration, one of the many international cul-de-sacs that administration, the U.S. government, found itself to have sped down to the end of. What was a complicated and bad and quickly worsening relationship with the largest country on earth by population, the country with the fastest growing economy on earth, and the country that was fast emerging even then as our most important strategic counterpart on the globe. The George W. Bush administration had a tough second term in a lot of ways. But one of the ways in which they had a tough second term is that they had a super rocky relationship with China, including a lot of unforced errors on the part of the United States. So in 2005, they were trying to kind of recast that important relationship with China. They were trying to work out some of our worst disagreements with China. And the George W. Bush White House invited the Chinese president at the time, Hu Jintao, to come visit the White House. And again, this is just one of those times in life when it was clear this might not work. I mean, it was at least clear it was going to be very tense from the beginning. I think it was maybe even clear from the beginning that it was going to go badly. I mean, in the first instance, the Chinese wanted Hu Jintao to be given the full state visit treatment. If he was going to come to the White House, he should get a state visit. George W. Bush administration said, no, it won't be a state visit. It will just be an official visit, which is one big rung down the ladder in terms of protocol and pomp and circumstance. The Chinese wanted Hu Jintao to have a state dinner at the White House. George W. Bush White House said, nope, we want you to come, but we're not willing to give you dinner. How about lunch? Then an even bigger problem. Hurricane Katrina blew ashore in the Gulf Coast and devastated the great American city of New Orleans. And the Bush administration, of course, disastrously botched the response to that hurricane. Hu Jintao's visit had initially been scheduled for the week after New Orleans had almost been wiped off the map. So that, of course, would not be an auspicious time for that delicate and important and complex visit. The whole thing had to be called off at the very last minute because of Katrina. It got postponed until months later. It was finally April of 2006 when they were at last able to do this difficult thing. It did turn out to be a nice day at the White House. Hu Jintao got his 21-gun salute on the White House South Lawn. They brought out the Colonial Fife and Drum Corps, which is always a cool thing to see in the Colonial Fife and Drum Corps outfits. But quickly thereafter, things started to go off the rails a little bit. You can tell that in part because even today, the archive AP video footage summing up how that visit went that day at the White House in 2006 is slugged with this title: Announcer misnames China, protester ejected, Bush pulls Hu's jacket. That's not me naming it. That's like how it's named in the AP archives. And it is true, in very quick succession, all in that one day, all in that one ceremony, all of those bad things happened. Start with the first little point of light there. Start with announcer misnames China.
Ladies and gentlemen, the national anthem of the Republic of China, followed by the national anthem of the United States of America.
National anthem of the Republic of China. Sounds like he's almost right? But he's missing a very important word. He should have been introducing the People's Republic of China, which is the official name for what we shorthand as China. If you drop the People's and you just say Republic of China, technically what that means you are introducing is the national anthem of Taiwan. So on this very fraught, very delicate, very sensitive occasion, the White House announcer is announcing that the president of China would stand there while we played the national anthem of Taiwan, because that's what the Republic of China is if you don't say People's Republic of China. And, you know, that may not have been a seemingly important point for the George W. Bush White House, but that's a really sensitive subject for China. So that was a, tough way to start. Here he is, the president of Taiwan. Oh, God, not Taiwan. Also, what was the other strange thing the AP put in the headline? Oh, yes, a Bush pulls Hu's jacket. That actually happened, too. That was this moment. The two leaders shake hands. They stand there for a brief moment side by side. Hu Jintao sort of moves to perambulate off the stage. It's less of a pull, it's more like a yank, but George W. Bush actually reaches out and pinches the arm of his jacket and yanks him back. Can we play that one more time? And Hu Jintao looks at him like, really? You're really gonna pull, really? You're pulling me back by my, okay. I mean, again, this was already kind of a fraught occasion. There's a lot of protocol concerns, right? The Chinese were asking for a lot more visual displays of respect than they were getting. A lot of focus on the Chinese side in particular, on getting the visuals just right, making sure everybody knew that appropriate respect was being paid to their president. So that's not awesome to have the U.S. president reaching out and yanking back the Chinese president by his jacket elbow, even if Hu was about to walk off the stage in the wrong direction in that moment. But the real problem that day turned out to be this other thing.
To enhance dialogues, expand common ground, deepen mutual trust and cooperation, and promote the all-round growth of constructive and cooperative China-U.S. relations in the 21st century.
So that's the Chinese president speaking Chinese. He pauses after every few lines so the English language translator can repeat what he said in English, right? It's a very formal occasion, very serious. This woman then starts screaming her guts out in the middle of Hu Jintao's speech. And she's actually really quite close to Hu Jintao when she's doing it. She's on an elevated press platform that's right in front of the podium from which Bush and Hu are making their remarks. One of the things I always find quite amazing about this footage is this very famous footage is how the photojournalists who are up there on the platform with her, you know, they've all got their long lenses out to try to get close-up shots of Hu and Bush as they're speaking at the White House. Once this woman interrupts the whole proceedings and starts screaming, and it goes on and on and on, she doesn't stop, and she's screaming in Chinese and English, and it's not ending, and it's sort of taking over this event. And Hu at one point stops speaking, and Bush says to him, go on, you're okay, urges him to go. I mean, one of the things that happens on the press platform is that the photographers all realize they're facing the wrong direction. The news event they're there to cover suddenly is no longer taking place at the podium. It's on the platform where they're all standing. And so they all turn in place to try to start photographing this woman who has really taken over the event. They've got these big telephoto lenses on their cameras. It's hard to photograph somebody who's 1.5 inches away from you when you've got an 8-inch long telephoto lens on your camera that's designed to shoot the dais far away. But it was just this crazy moment. I mean, this woman's interruption of that fraught, super serious, super tense White House event, it was really something. And part of what made it so memorable is that very high tone of her voice, which is kind of piercing. That made it, I think, hard to understand exactly what she was saying. A combination of her high voice and the fact that she was really hollering, and the fact that she was speaking in a couple of different languages, and the fact that Hu was speaking in Chinese and there's an English translation over him. NBC News later quoted her as saying in English, screaming out, President Bush, stop him from killing. President Bush, stop him from persecuting the Falun Gong. NBC also quoted a Mandarin-speaking cameraman who said what she screamed in Mandarin was, Falun Gong is good. Stop persecuting Falun Gong, Hu Jintao. Your time is over. Evil people will die early. NBC Nightly News also led with the story of her disruption of that event that night on the network news.
This was considered to the president a major embarrassment, and it came on a day that was tightly scripted down to the last detail. The atmosphere was formal for Hu Jintao's first visit to the White House, the setting tightly secured. Yet when President Hu began to make his remarks, there was a rare interruption.
President Bush, stop him! Kill him!
The protester was later identified as Wang Wenyi, a reporter working for a newspaper linked to the spiritual group Falun Gong, which is banned in China. Mr. Bush encouraged Hu to keep speaking, saying, "You're okay." But the outburst was a major irritant to the Chinese leader since the White House gave her a day pass to attend the event. She was arrested and later charged with disorderly conduct and attempting to intimidate a foreign official.
Again, this happened back in April 2006. We actually were able to obtain the criminal complaint that, in fact, was brought against this woman in D.C. federal court when she was charged. The affidavit that accompanied the complaint tells you how seriously U.S. authorities took this as a potential criminal matter. Quote, on April 20th, 2006 at 9:57 a.m. on the grounds of the White House located at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest, Washington, D.C., the defendant Wenyi Wang willfully intimidated, coerced, threatened, and harassed a foreign official, Hu Jintao, the president of the People's Republic of China, as President Hu, acting in his official capacity, was giving an official public speech and or statement at the White House to members of the media and invited guests of the U.S. government, Ms. Wang began to yell at President Hu in a loud voice in excess of 2 minutes. At the time Ms. Wang was yelling at President Hu, she was standing on a press platform directly across from President Hu. President Hu was standing next to the President of the United States as Ms. Wang began to yell. The words that Ms. Wang yelled at Hu in Chinese have been translated by a certified interpreter, and then it goes on in that vein. Secret Service affidavit for bringing charges against her. Charges of not just disorderly conduct, but specifically attempting to intimidate a foreign official while he is acting in his official capacity. Right? So serious charges brought against this woman who was arrested at the White House that day. Right? She went on and on and on yelling for like 3 minutes, but they finally got her out of there. She reportedly spent the night in jail after they hauled her out. That said, ultimately within a couple of months, prosecutors did a deal with her. Those charges did get dropped. This was a really consequential thing that happened. I mean, the first visit of the Chinese president to the George W. Bush White House, and it was considered to be a huge bust. There was no agreement on any kind. China didn't budge on any of the things the Bush White House and the president himself asked them to move on. In fact, it was a source of great embarrassment and consternation between the two sides. President Bush himself ended up apologizing to the Chinese president personally for President Hu having gotten screamed at while he tried to give remarks on the White House lawn. The woman who was arrested for protesting that day, interestingly, she ultimately brought a FOIA lawsuit to try to support her allegation that the cameraman who had actually ended her disruption by grabbing her around the neck and shoulder and ultimately covering up her mouth. She says he was applying pressure points to her before he covered her mouth to close her mouth. She says that cameraman who grabbed her while she was yelling to stop her protest was an employee of China State Television. She filed a FOIA lawsuit to the White House to find out if that's true, if that's who he was. And ultimately, that FOIA lawsuit was not successful, but the allegation itself added more fuel to the Chinese fury over this incident, right? The perceived insult by the Chinese government here because of the prospect that it had basically been a Chinese state cameraman. It had been the Chinese government acting itself, using its own people, who ultimately controlled that protest and quieted this woman in order to prevent the Chinese president from continuing to be yelled at for minutes on end at a formal speech on the South Lawn of the White House, right? So it was all bad. It actually got worse when the White House explained defensively that there's no way they could have seen this coming. They said the woman who was arrested for disruption was just a reporter. She'd covered other White House events. There was no way they could have known there was any red flag about her whatsoever. Actually, it turns out that that same woman had gotten herself into a similar event featuring Hu Jintao's predecessor as China's president, where she screamed at him and heckled him, too. Same woman, 5 years earlier, screaming at a different Chinese president at a different event just like this. The White House apparently did not know that when they gave her a one-day pass to come cover this Chinese president's visit as well. It's just a remarkable moment in the George W. Bush presidency, remarkable moment between the U.S. and Chinese governments, remarkable moment in terms of White House security and protocol. Now, the woman was credentialed to be there by the George W. Bush White House because she was affiliated with a news outlet. She was affiliated with a little-known newspaper called the Epoch Times. What their press pass holder, that woman, had been screaming at the Chinese president about was the Chinese government's persecution of people who are practitioners of something called Falun Gong, which is a Chinese religious movement that has been engaged for years in a very loud, very big brawl with the Chinese government. Falun Gong was outlawed by the Chinese government in 1999. Their members claim to have suffered brutal repression at the hands of China, including allegations of murder and torture of their members. The Chinese government, for their part, they have relentlessly denounced this group as if it's some sort of very dangerous cult that must be suppressed. And whatever you think of this fight between that religious sect and the Chinese government, the cult part of the Chinese government's allegation has been helped along in the world press by the founder of that religious group repeatedly telling reporters about how he believes he possesses the ability to fly. He also says he can levitate through walls. He says that he needs people to know that the Earth is slowly being infiltrated by extraterrestrials, and also, naturally, that the end times are near. So, the year after the Chinese government banned Falun Gong in China, again, which led to remarkable and very scary allegations of serious persecution by the Chinese government. A year after they outlawed it, practitioners of that religious movement founded an English language newspaper in the United States, basically to support that religious movement. It's a newspaper called the Epoch Times. And you might have, seen it around over the years. You'll often see it in free newspaper newsstands in major cities. You've definitely seen pro-Falun Gong protesters at lots of Chinese government events anywhere in the Western world. This is a protest movement against the Chinese government that has popped its head up in the United States, sometimes to great and nearly catastrophic effect, including that fateful day in 2006 on the White House South Lawn. But this religious movement and its conflict with the Chinese government and that newspaper promoting the interests of this dissident Chinese religious sect, it's been a China story, right? Much more than it has ever been a U.S. story. I mean, yeah, occasionally, like on the White House South Lawn that day, it's right there in Americans' faces, and occasionally they have these big, loud protests. But it is a story that has not been seen about our own government. It has been a thing having to do with China and this dispute. Well, NBC News has a scoop out today about that group, about how that paper, the Epoch Times, has transformed itself a lot in the Trump era. It's a real revelation, this reporting from NBC News. I mean, Epoch Times and its media group, they've made themselves into a whole new thing entirely and in a very big way. Over the last 6 months, the single largest organization that has spent more money on Facebook ads promoting Donald Trump and Donald Trump's reelection is, as you might expect, the Donald Trump reelection campaign. The organization that is second on that list, though, is this Falun Gong newspaper, the Epoch Times. Quote, by the numbers, there is no bigger advocate of President Donald Trump on Facebook than the Epoch Times. The small New York-based nonprofit news outlet has spent more than $1.5 million in the last 6 months on about 11,000 pro-Trump advertisements, according to data from Facebook's advertising archive. More than any organization outside the Trump campaign itself, and more than most Democratic presidential candidates have spent on their own campaigns. So why is this little special interest newspaper becoming the biggest online booster of Donald Trump's reelection other than Donald Trump's reelection campaign itself? Well, it's apparently their new business model. Here, for example, is their list of special offers showing what you get when you subscribe to the Epoch Times. You get 2 exclusive gifts valued at $34. One is a special report from the Epoch Times titled American Revival, about 70 ways Donald Trump has changed the nation. And you better believe they're all for the good. So you get this big, glossy, centerfold love note thing about how wonderful Donald Trump is. That's one of the presents you get if you subscribe to this newspaper. The other thing you get is a large Spygate infographic poster. So you can put it up your wall and track the conspiracy at home. The conspiracy in this case being something about Donald Trump saving America from satanic Democratic pedophiles. Also, something Sally Yates, something John McCain, something Donna Brazile. Anyway, that's part of your $34 value gift if you just subscribe to the paper. They're also quite desperate to make sure that you subscribe to their various social media channels.
Click on that button below and try the Epoch Times newspaper for a month for just $1. That way you can get real news delivered to your doorstep and experience the wonder of pure American journalism that's based in traditional values. Just click on that button below.
As NBC News puts it, this whole shift toward Trump and specifically Trump conspiracy theory stuff has been a financial transformation for this little corner of the We Are Mad at China niche protest news outlet. But it is really paying off for them. Quote, before 2016, the Epoch Times generally stayed out of U.S. politics unless they dovetailed with Chinese interests. The publication's recent ad strategy, coupled with the broader campaign to embrace social media and conservative U.S. politics, and Trump in particular, has doubled the Epoch Times' revenue, according to the organization's tax filings. And when it comes to their revenue, what seems to be really driving things are the parts of the Epoch Media Group that are producing online-only content under an entity called the New Tang Dynasty. Their YouTube channel is all stuff like this. You know, QAnon, why it's not a conspiracy theory. Handsome picture of Donald Trump. Also, tentacles of the deep state exposed. Also, why drug epidemic was engineered by deep state. Also, how the deep state funds caravan and chaos in the United States. This is a good one. Deep state, 13 bloodlines and their diabolical endgame. Tentacles of the deep state. So the newspaper that until very recently just promoted the interests of the dissident Chinese religious movement is now whole hog on board, both in its newspaper and its related media entities, with all of the completely around the bend, pro-Trump, intergalactic conspiracy theory stuff. Literally about, you know, drinking the blood of sacrificed children and the Illuminati and their persistent, terrifying bloodlines. Alongside all the explicitly pro-Trump stuff and this kind of stuff, there's also just like traditional grade A American paranoia brain rot stuff, like how Ted Bundy, the serial killer, was groomed by the deep state for politics, but he branched off into being a serial killer. Also, how the deep state is hiding the true science of astrology. And as you might expect, naturally, there's the 9/11 stuff.
The people did not die in 9/11 in the planes, okay? They landed and then they were resuscitated, and then at that point you get brought into these underground bases and you spend the rest of your life working. You're never going to see above ground again. That's where most likely these people from 9/11 went.
Now, granted, you might think that sounds crazy. But if so, it's only because the lizard people are blocking your third eye vision so the deep state can tap your microchip in ways that make you control the caravan and Mike Flynn, the Clintons, deep state climate change agenda, etc. I mean, you know what I mean. It's easy. It's sometimes fun to, like, you know, trace American conspiracy stuff around the, you know, ragged edges of right-wing media. But this media entity, from which I just showed you all that stuff, this media entity is right now the largest source of paid pro-Trump content on Facebook, other than the Trump re-election campaign. And their pro-Trump effort on Facebook at this point is larger than any Facebook effort made by any Democratic presidential candidate at all. The Epic Media Group is doing all of this stuff. They are also being given interviews with Trump daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, and Trump cabinet officials, and pro-Trump Republican members of Congress like Matt Gaetz and Mark Meadows. They're all doing Epic Times stuff to promote them, since they're getting the kind of promotion that they want, too. I mean, this is as big as it gets in pro-Trump media right now, where the people from 9/11 are still to this day living in secret underground cities, toiling as slaves to Hillary Clinton, or something Illuminati. NBC's scoop today is titled "Trump, QAnon, and an Impending Judgment Day: Behind the Facebook-Fueled Rise of the Epoch Times." The subject of this reporting appeared to be quite furious with it today, but one of the reporters who got to the bottom of this very weird story is going to join us in just a few minutes. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.